Arthur Vance was 45 years old. For 15 of those years, he had been married to Elara. He built bridges for a living, structures of steel and concrete designed to withstand forces 100 times greater than they would ever face. He believed in tolerances, in stress testing, in knowing the load a thing could bear before it failed. He had applied the same principles to his life, building it with methodical care. The career, the home, the marriage. He believed he had built a structure that would last. Then, on a Tuesday in October, while searching for a municipal bond statement on their shared cloud server, he found a folder mislabeled gallery archives. Inside was not art, but a second set of books for his life. It was a detailed accounting of a planned demolition. His planned demolition. What Arthur did next would not be loud, or fast, or angry. It would be quiet. It would be patient. And it would cost Elara everything she thought she had secured. Before we chart the anatomy of that controlled demolition, comment with the city you are watching from and subscribe for more stories of quiet, unyielding justice. The story of Arthur Vance is not one of revenge, but of correction. It is the story of a builder who discovered a fatal structural flaw and proceeded, with professional calm, to decommission the edifice before it collapsed on its own. He did not rush. He never rushed. He simply began to work, applying the same principles he used to span rivers to the task of dismantling a lie. The first step was to understand the materials he was working with. He had thought he was working with reinforced concrete and steel. He learned he was working with sand and glass. His days began before the sun. The alarm was an unnecessary formality. His internal chronometer was set to 4:30 a.m. The house was silent, a cavern of cool, recycled air. Elara slept in the master suite, a space she had redesigned 3 times in 5 years, each iteration colder and more architectural than the last. She called his side of the bed his berth, a joke he'd never found amusing. He would rise without a sound, his movements economical, practiced. The floorboards in the hallway did not creak under his weight. He knew their weaknesses. In the kitchen, the only light was the small, green diode on the coffee maker he'd set the night before. He would stand at the wide island of Italian marble, a surface that was always cold to the touch, and drink the first cup of black coffee while looking out at the city lights beginning to prick the darkness. This was his time, the time before the performance of his life began. He was a man of routines. The same gray work shirt, the same steel-toed boots, the same drive to the site, always arriving a half hour before his foreman, Ben. He liked to walk the project in the gray dawn light, to feel the cold steel of the I-beams, to smell the ozone from a fresh weld, to see the structure as a living thing, breathing in the morning air. His work was tangible. It had rules. Physics did not lie. A weld was either good, or it was not. A support was either plumb, or it was not. Concrete reached a certain psi, or it had to be torn out and poured again. There was no ambiguity in his professional world. This clarity was a comfort, a foundation upon which he had built his entire identity. He was Arthur Vance, the man who built bridges that did not fail. Elara's world was different. It was a world of aesthetics, of perception, of social calculus he found exhausting. Her art gallery was less a business and more a stage upon which she curated her own importance. She dealt in abstracts, in things that were valuable because a select few agreed they were. She would describe a painting to him, her hands gesturing, her voice filled with a passion he did not doubt was genuine, but could not personally access. He would listen, nod, and feel the familiar sensation of standing on the far side of a divide he had never learned how to cross. He supported her, of course. His earnings had funded the gallery's initial lease and 2 subsequent expansions. He considered it an investment in her happiness, a variable he could control through simple financial application. He saw now that this was a foundational error in his calculations. He had treated her happiness as a static load, when it was, in fact, a dynamic and corrosive one. She often told him he was too literal. "Arthur, not everything is a blueprint," she would say, a touch of patronizing affection in her voice. "Sometimes you just have to feel the space," he would nod. But privately, he disagreed. Everything was a blueprint. You just had to find it. You had to know how to read it. He watched her across the dinner table, her face illuminated by the soft, expensive lighting she'd had installed. He observed the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when he spoke of his work. He noted the way her phone, once left casually on the table, was now always screened down or in her purse. He registered the increased frequency of trips to meet with artists or consult with collectors in other cities. He had filed these data points away without conscious analysis, the way a seismograph records tremors too faint for a human to feel. They were just data, until he found the folder. Then, they were not just data. They were stress fractures in the core of the structure. The discovery itself was banal. An email from their accountant requesting a statement for a municipal bond purchased 7 years prior. A simple piece of financial housekeeping. Arthur was the one who managed their long-term investments, the slow, unglamorous portfolio of bonds and index funds that he had been building since his first job. Elara managed what she called their lifestyle accounts, a series of more fluid, high-risk investments, and the gallery's finances. It was a division of labor that had seemed logical. He built the foundation, she decorated the house. He logged into the shared drive, a digital space as neatly organized as his workshop. He navigated to the finance folder, then investments, then bonds. It wasn't there. He ran a search for the bond's CUSIP number. The search returned one result, located in a folder path he did not recognize. Elara, Gallery, Admin, Gallery Archives. He paused. It was an error, certainly. A simple misfiling. He clicked the link. The folder opened. There was no bond statement. Instead, there was a collection of other files. Spreadsheets, PDFs of bank statements, scans of legal documents. One file was named Asset Allocation _Postals. Another was Julian _memo Q2 PDF. A third was a password-protected zip file simply named Contingency. He felt nothing at first. No shock. No anger. It was the same feeling he had when an inspector's report came back showing a flaw in a batch of concrete. It was a problem to be solved. He clicked on the spreadsheet. It opened to a list of assets. His assets. His salary. His investment portfolio. His pension. And on the right, 2 columns. Column A was labeled Joint, column B was labeled E. V Sol. A significant portion of the numbers in the Joint column had been systematically moved to the E. V Sol column. The transfers were dated. They corresponded, he noted, with her business trips. He spent 2 hours that evening, after Elara was asleep, cross-referencing the documents in that folder. Her brother, Julian, a wealth manager he'd always found slick and performative, was a key architect of the plan. His memos were clinical, advising Elara on the quietest ways to migrate assets, to establish new accounts in her name only, to leverage her gallery as a pass-through entity for funds siphoned from their joint accounts. It was a 15-month project, meticulously documented. There was a second ledger for the gallery, showing its true and profitable state, and another, rosier version for the bank and for him. They were preparing for a narrative. The narrative of a failed marriage in which the successful, artistic wife had to protect her assets from her financially reckless, blue-collar husband. It was a fiction, but a well-constructed one. He found the password for the zip file in one of Julian's memos. It was Alighieri 1321. Dante, the year of his death. Inside were draft affidavits from 2 of her friends, attesting to his emotional distance and erratic financial behavior. There was even a draft of a press release for the gallery, announcing her new, independent vision, funded by a private family investment. He closed the laptop. The green light on the coffee maker blinked, a tiny, rhythmic beacon in the dark. He did not feel betrayed. The word was too emotional, too imprecise. He felt he had been given a new set of drawings. The original blueprint for his marriage was now obsolete. He was looking at the demolition plan. And as a builder, he knew that a demolition, like a construction, had to be managed with precision. You did not just swing a wrecking ball. You identified the load-bearing points. You weakened them systematically. You controlled the fall. He went to bed. He lay beside his wife, matching his breathing to hers, a placid mask of sleep on his face. But he was not sleeping. He was making a list, an inventory. On one side, what he knew. On the other, what he needed to know. The project had begun. The next morning, nothing changed. This was his first principle of control: maintain the established routine. Any deviation would be a signal, a tremor for Elara to detect. He rose at 4:30 a.m. He drank his coffee at the Marble Island. He kissed her sleeping temple before he left, the gesture as automatic and empty as a switch being thrown. He drove to the site, The bridge, a graceful arch of steel over a muddy brown river, was half finished. He stood on the temporary decking, the wind pulling at his jacket, and looked at the plans in his hand. The real plans. The ones that showed every rivet, every weld, every point of connection that held the massive structure together. He thought of the spreadsheet on Elara's cloud drive. Her plan. It was detailed, but it had a flaw. A critical, architectural flaw. It was built on the assumption that he would not check the math. It was built on the assumption that he was the man she described in those draft affidavits. Distant, unobservant, a simple man who built simple things and did not understand the complex world she inhabited. Her entire plan was predicated on his passivity. She had mistaken his steadiness for weakness. She had mistaken his silence for ignorance. This was the foundational error, and he would use it to bring the entire corrupt structure down. His first call was not to a lawyer. It was to his brother. David Vance owned a garage that specialized in restoring classic cars. He was a man who understood mechanics, the interplay of moving parts. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm over the distant sound of an impact wrench. "Arthur," it was not a question. "David," Arthur said. "I need a secure computer and a place to store some documents." Off-site. There was no pause. No questions about why. David understood systems. He understood the need for redundancy and security. "My office. The old safe is behind the false wall. Combination is the day Dad came home. I'll leave the back door unlocked for you tonight. You need anything else?" "Not yet," Arthur said. "All right. Call me when you do." The line went dead. Information transferred. Call concluded. That was how the Vances communicated. That night, Arthur returned to the cloud drive. He used a new laptop, one he'd bought for cash at a big box store an hour from his home. He worked with the methodical slowness of a man defusing a bomb. He created a multi-layered encrypted container. Into it, he copied every file, every spreadsheet, every email and memo from Elara's hidden folder. He copied the metadata. He took screenshots of the file locations and timestamps. He created a perfect, verifiable mirror of her secret world. Then he drove to his brother's garage. The smell of oil and solvent was a comfort, a smell from his childhood. He placed the encrypted hard drive into the old, cold safe, spun the dial, and drove home. Stage 1 was complete. The evidence was secured. His next step was professional consultation. He did not look for a bulldog divorce attorney from a glossy magazine ad. He looked for an engineer. He found Martha Albright, a semi-retired corporate litigator known for her work in construction disputes and contract law. Her firm's website was plain, text-based, functional. It listed her credentials like a bill of materials. He called her office. Her assistant informed him that Ms. Albright was not taking new clients. "Please tell her Arthur Vance called," he said. "My father was Frank Vance. They worked on the old city courthouse remediation project together in 98-inch. There was a pause. He could hear the assistant typing. "She'll call you back," the woman said. Her tone shifted from dismissal to curiosity. The call came 2 hours later, at 9:30 p.m. Her voice was gravelly, impatient. "Vance, you better not be wasting my time." "I'm not," Arthur said. He did not describe the emotional toll, the betrayal. He described the situation in the language he and she would both understand. "I've discovered a fraudulent set of project accounts. There has been a systematic and undocumented transfer of capital assets from a joint venture into a sole proprietorship. The documentation is extensive. The goal appears to be the dissolution of the primary partnership and the seizure of all shared assets." There was a long silence on the line. He could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass. "Bring me the documents," she said. "My office. Tomorrow. 7 a.m. She hung up. The meeting with Albright was in a conference room that overlooked the port. The room was Spartan, a long mahogany table, 12 chairs, one screen. Albright was a small, severe woman in her late 60s with eyes that seemed to be conducting a structural analysis of him. He did not speak. He plugged the hard drive into the system and projected the file directory onto the screen. He opened the first document, the asset allocation _ postal spreadsheet. She stared at the screen for a full 10 minutes, her face unreadable. She scrolled through the tabs, her eyes scanning the numbers, the dates, the notes field. She did not ask him how he felt. She did not offer sympathy. She said, "Show me the rest." For the next 2 hours, he walked her through the demolition plan. Julian's memos. the falsified gallery ledgers, the draft affidavits. He presented it without emotion, as if reviewing a contractor's fraudulent change order requests. When he was finished, he closed the laptop. Albright leaned back in her chair. She looked out the window at a container ship being guided into the harbor by a tugboat. She's built a narrative, Albright said, more to herself than to him. A good one. She's the sophisticated artist, you're the simple builder. She'll claim you were mismanaging funds, that you were a financial risk, and that she was only taking prudent steps to protect the marital assets for both your sakes. Her brother will back her up. Her friends will back her up. On its face, it's a strong position. The math doesn't support it, Arthur said. The math rarely matters in these things. Albright corrected him, her gaze finally returning to his. Story is what matters. They have a good story. We have a spreadsheet. We need more than a spreadsheet. We need to see them act out their story. We need to give them the stage to perform on. She tapped a long, bony finger on the table. She thinks you're a fool, Vance. She's counting on it. Her entire plan depends on you being exactly the man she's telling everyone you are. Are you willing to play the part? For how long? Arthur asked. Until we have them on record, Albright said. Until their actions confirm the intent documented here. Until their story becomes their indictment. A container horn blew in the distance, a low, mournful sound. Arthur thought of the bridge, of the calculations for wind shear and load distribution. This was no different. It was a test. A stress test. What do you need me to do? He asked. Albright smiled, a thin, predatory expression. You're a builder, Vance. I need you to tell your wife that your biggest project is about to collapse. I need you to tell her you're facing financial ruin. I need you to tell her you're bankrupt. And then, she said, leaning forward, you are to do nothing but watch. Watch and record. He chose a Thursday evening. Thursdays were Elara's gallery nights, when she hosted small, exclusive viewings for potential clients. She would come home late, smelling of expensive perfume and champagne, energized by the performance. He waited in the living room, the lights low. He had not rehearsed. Rehearsal was for actors. He was an engineer. He had a set of inputs he needed to deliver. The output would be the data he required. She entered around 11, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She was flushed, radiant. She had sold a large sculpture to a tech CEO. A fantastic night, darling, she said, dropping her keys into a ceramic bowl. We absolutely have to celebrate this weekend. He did not stand. He looked at her from the armchair where he sat in shadow. We can't, he said. His voice was flat, toneless. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? Don't be a drag, Arthur. This is big. The inspectors found a fault in the primary pylons for the new bridge, he said. The lie came easily, wrapped in the technical language that was his truth. A microscopic fissure in the steel from the foundry. It's a catastrophic materials failure. The whole batch is compromised. She stared at him, her mind clearly struggling to shift from the abstract world of art to the concrete one of his work. So, they'll replace it, won't they? The supplier pays for it. The supplier is a small, specialized foundry. They declared bankruptcy this morning. He continued, layering the fiction with precision. Our firm's insurance will cover some of it, but the liability clause for materials is capped. The city is going to sue. The bondholders are going to sue. The firm is going to go into receivership. He let that hang in the air. He watched her face. He was looking for the flicker, the micro-expression, the moment her mind stopped processing his problem and started calculating her own. It came faster than he expected. The firm? She said, her voice a notch higher. But, you're a partner. What does that mean for you? For us, it means we're exposed, he said. The partnership structure means our personal assets are on the table. Everything. He met her eyes. I think we're going to be bankrupt, Elara. The performance that followed was masterful. She moved toward him, her hands outstretched. She knelt before his chair, her expression a perfect mask of concern and shock. Oh, Arthur. My God. How could this happen? Her hands were cold on his. There was no tremor in them. There was no fear for him. He could feel it. He was an instrument, and he could sense the absence of resonance. Her concern was a performance of a memory of an emotion. We'll fight this, she said, her voice low and urgent. You're the best at what you do. It's not your fault. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, he said, playing his role. He let his shoulders slump. He ran a hand over his face. The numbers are what they are. She held his hands tighter. No, No, we are not going to lose everything we've built. I won't let that happen. She stood up, a new energy in her posture. She began to pace. My brother, Julian. He'll know what to do. He understands these things. We need to protect what we can. We need to be smart. Arthur watched her. She had not said, we need to protect what we have. She had said, we need to protect what we can. It was a subtle but significant distinction. The shift was already happening. The joint venture was dissolving in her mind. I'll call him now, she said, reaching for her phone. It's late, Arthur said, a token protest. He'll want to know. He's family. He'll help us. She walked into the kitchen, her back to him, and he heard her quick, hushed tones as she dialed. He did not need to hear the conversation. He had read the memos. He knew the playbook. She was activating the contingency plan. The stage was set. The actors were in place. And in his pocket, his phone was making a perfect, high-fidelity audio recording of the entire evening. The days that followed were an exercise in controlled observation. Elara was a whirlwind of manufactured efficiency. She treated their impending financial collapse like a branding problem, one that could be managed with the right strategy. She arranged meetings with a new set of lawyers, ones Julian recommended. They were aggressive, expensive, and specialized in asset protection. Arthur sat through the meetings in a state of feigned despair, nodding along as they explained complex legal structures designed to shield certain assets from creditors. Elara's assets. The gallery. The accounts listed in the E.V. Sol column of her spreadsheet. She was careful. She would frame it all as a joint effort. Darling, we need to move the gallery's holding company offshore, she'd say, her tone one of a co-conspirator. It's the only way to ensure the creditors can't seize it. It's our only remaining income stream. Arthur would just nod. Whatever you think is best, Elara. Her relief was palpable. His passivity, the very trait she had secretly mocked, was now her greatest tool. She saw his quiet agreement not as a strategy, but as a symptom of his broken spirit. He was the defeated man, and she, the savvy wife, was salvaging what she could from the wreckage. It was the exact narrative from her draft affidavits, and she was acting it out with breathtaking commitment. Julian was always present, either in person or on speakerphone, his voice a smooth, reassuring balm of financial jargon. He spoke to Arthur with a kind of gentle pity, the way one speaks to a slow child. Look, Arthur, this is a terrible situation, but we're going to get through it. The key is to firewall your liability. We'll ring-fence Elara's core assets, the ones she brought into the marriage, you understand, and that will give us a foundation to rebuild from. Arthur understood perfectly. He had never seen a copy of their prenuptial agreement, but he knew for a fact there wasn't one. Elara had brought no significant assets into the marriage. Her family had money, but she did not. The gallery, her car, her entire lifestyle, it was all built on the foundation of his income. The fiction of her core assets was being constructed in real time, and they expected him to co-sign the blueprints. He recorded every conversation. He forwarded every email Elara sent him, usually summaries of the lawyer's advice, with her own helpful notes like action, Arthur to sign attached power of attorney for transfer of gallery stock to a new, anonymous email address. From there, he forwarded them to Albright. He was creating a new set of documents, a new ledger, one that chronicled not the plan, but the execution. The critical moment came 2 weeks after his announcement. Elara sat him down at the cold marble island in the kitchen. She had a stack of documents in a leather-bound folder. Her face was a mask of grave seriousness. Arthur, we need to talk, she began. Julian and the lawyers have come up with a final plan. It's our best shot. He looked at the folder. He knew, without seeing them, that they were transfer of title documents, disclaimers of interest, forms that would legally sever his connection to every remaining marital asset of value. It's going to be difficult, she continued, her voice soft with feigned sympathy. To protect the house, we need to transfer the deed into a trust that I control. For now, it's just a legal maneuver. And the brokerage account. We need to liquidate it and move the funds to an account that can't be traced back to the firm's liabilities, an account in her name. A new one, in a different country. He looked at her, at this woman he had spent 15 years with. He saw no conflict in her eyes, no flicker of guilt. He saw only focus. The focus of a predator that has successfully isolated its prey. She believed him to be wounded, helpless. She believed she was performing a mercy killing. It feels, he said, letting his voice sound weak, uncertain, like I'm giving up everything. Her hand covered his. It was meant to be reassuring, but it felt like a restraint. It's not giving up, darling. It's being strategic. We are moving the assets to safety. Once the bankruptcy is over, we can rebuild. Together. There it was. The final, load-bearing lie. The promise of a future together that every document in her secret folder proved was a fiction. This was the moment Albright had been waiting for. The moment when their actions unequivocally demonstrated fraudulent intent. They weren't protecting marital assets. They were stealing them, using his manufactured crisis as cover. He picked up the pen she had so thoughtfully placed beside the documents. He looked at the signature line. He looked at her. Her expression was one of tense anticipation, a slight parting of the lips, a gleam in her eyes. He put the pen down. No, he said. The word was quiet. It was not angry. It was not defiant. It was a statement of fact, a change in state. Her smile froze. What? Arthur, don't be difficult. This is our only option. No, he said again, his voice unchanged. He stood up from the table. I don't think I'll be signing these. Confusion warred with irritation on her face. This was not in her script. The defeated man was not supposed to refuse his lines. What has gotten into you? Are you trying to ruin us completely? This is what the lawyers advised. My lawyer, Arthur said, advises differently. The color drained from her face. Your lawyer? You went to another lawyer? Who? Her name is Martha Albright, he said. She'll be in touch with your legal team tomorrow. I believe she's scheduling a meeting for Friday at her office. 10 o'clock. You and Julian should be there. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there with a stack of useless papers and the sudden, terrifying realization that the ground beneath her had begun to shift. The demolition had entered its final, controlled phase. The conference room at Albright's firm was cold. Arthur was there first, seated beside Albright at the head of the long mahogany table. He wore his work clothes. A simple gray shirt, clean but not pressed. He looked out of place against the polished wood and chrome, which was the intention. Elara and Julian arrived at 10:05 a.m., accompanied by two lawyers in sharp, dark suits. Elara's face was a tight mask of composure, but Arthur could see the strain around her eyes. She had tried to reach him for 2 days, a frantic series of calls and texts that he had ignored. Julian was all bluster and confidence, shaking hands with Albright's associate as if he were closing a friendly deal. He nodded curtly at Arthur. Arthur, glad you came to your senses. Let's get this mess sorted out. They took their seats opposite. One of Elara's lawyers, a man with silver hair and a deep tan, cleared his throat and began. Ms. Albright, we're here to finalize the asset protection strategy for Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Given the catastrophic failure of Mr. Vance's firm, time is of the essence. We have the transfer documents ready for his signature. He slid the same leather-bound folder across the table. Albright did not look at it. She looked at Julian. Mr. Croft, she said, her voice like gravel. Before we discuss this strategy, I have a few questions about the existing financial arrangements. Let's start with the gallery. Can you walk me through its Q2 performance? Julian was momentarily thrown. I don't see how that's relevant. We're dealing with the collapse of Arthur's company. Humor me, Albright said. She nodded to her associate, who dimmed the lights and turned on the large screen at the end of the room.